Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bill Spurlock, Director of Rutherford County Schools, and I wanted to go over a little bit of information pertaining to our quarantine procedures and why they were changed. Once again, when we first started at the beginning of the school year 2 weeks ago, we recommended those that were caught up in contact tracing to quarantine. And then, quite frankly, a few of ours did do exactly what we requested. However, we had some that did not. And over time, we started seeing some of these having issues with testing positive. Now, what that did, obviously, is it not only created a problem in terms for that child, but it also created a problem for others that that child had been around. Now, what we did then is, as we saw this as being a problem, we implemented a required quarantine if you're caught up contact tracing. Now, we will say that I think we all want our students in school. There's no if, and, buts about it, but we want them in school in a safe environment. Now, quite frankly, we do know that quarantine is not an exact science. Some will go out and not ever experience any symptoms. Some will. So that's the reason why we took the time frame at 7 days with no symptoms coming back. So in essence, we're talking about really 5 school days. Now, I do understand those that are concerned about multiple times being contact traced. And quite frankly, there's a good point with that. We are working through that process and talking to our health officials and seeing how we can make that less impactful. But also, I want you to know that when we have to do this, we are required by the State Department of Education of providing what's called asynchronous instruction. We will be working on ways in order to improve this. We currently are working through this process and building up the capacity where we can provide effective instruction, whether it's in the classroom or out of the classroom for a short period of time. Now, talking about inclement weather days, it all goes down to this. Our requirement by the State Board of Education is to provide 6.5 hours of instruction daily. Rutherford County Schools, like a lot of school systems, build in an additional half hour into that schedule, so we go from 6.5 hours to 7 hours. What this does is allow us to stockpile days in case of inclement weather. What we may have to do this year, if we ever have to close a school, we will use an inclement weather day. A teacher's contract is for 200 days. 180 of those days is for instruction. 12 of those days are for professional development, and 8 of those days are for our holidays. When we close a school for inclement weather, we use one of those days, and everything in that school is shut down. Now, in terms of what occurs when a student has to quarantine or isolate due to COVID, we have 2 options there. First, we start with asynchronous learning. Then, if it stretches out due to testing positive and it becomes more impactful, we can look at homebound services. We are looking at ways that we can improve, and this information will be provided to you later on this afternoon by our Assistant Superintendent of Instruction, Dr. Jimmy Sullivan.
Good afternoon. My name is Jimmy Sullivan, Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction here at Rutherford County Schools. First, I just want to take a second and thank you for our start to the school year. We started off with a lot of positive momentum. Of course, the events of the last couple of weeks have definitely been challenging and have somewhat dampened that momentum. But I want to assure you that we're here all on the same page. Our teachers, our instructional staff, our parents, our community, all want to do what is best for our students. And I hope to be able to provide some clarity over how we're operating and the plans that we have in place. First, our task is really twofold. We are first, of course, want to make sure that we are providing educational opportunities for our students. That is our mission, to make sure our students are successful. Second, however, we also have to make sure that conditions for our teachers are in place so that our teachers can be successful to ultimately help our students. And so we're going to talk about some things that will help us be able to ensure both of those can happen. A little bit of background. Last year, we operated under something called a Continuous Learning Plan, the CLP. The CLP was in place that allowed us as a district to offer hybrid, distance learning, and traditional learning all at the same time, regardless of whether a student was in quarantine, positive, or just chose to be at home for a different environment. That option is not in place for any school district in the state of Tennessee for the 21-22 school year. However, we do have an option called remote instruction. Remote instruction is only available to students if they are actually isolated due to a contact trace or if they are positive due to the effects of COVID-19. That is the only opportunity that we have to be able to provide remote instruction to where a student is not actually in the building. So let's talk about what that looks like a little bit. Really, we have options based on the situation. When we started the school year, we had very few students who were either a positive case or quarantined. For our teachers, it was very easy to be able to treat that very similar to any other illness. Not saying COVID is any other illness, but it was very easy to treat that type of absence in a similar manner. If one or two students in your class were out, that student would just get caught back up with their teacher once they returned. With the change in quarantine and the additional cases that we have had in Rutherford County, that of course is not necessarily where we are. We have a lot of larger number of students who are out of our classrooms, and so our teachers may have half of their kids in or a fourth of their kids in, and that number fluctuates daily. So we're having to change our approach to some degree. Starting on Monday, we have asked all of our Rutherford County school teachers to be able to post their work that they have for the week on a school-wide platform. Now, that was one of the things of the lessons we learned last year, was to try to keep that as consistent as possible across a school. So you're going to notice this information if your child is quarantined or in isolation. It'll either be on their school website, it'll either be on Schoology, or it'll be through Teams. Your school will be communicating in the event of a quarantine, or if your child is out for positive, on which one of those avenues to find that information. However, we also want to make sure that we are being proactive. From a curriculum and instruction standpoint, we are going to have it linked on the Rutherford County Schools website, that if your child needs to find where their linked Clever page or their Teams page or their Schoology website is, we will have a link directing them to their login as well to be able to help students get to their location. Let's now talk about a different option. So that was asynchronous. That is where our students are in person working with our teachers, but then we have a certain number of students who are quarantined or isolated at home, and teachers are responsible for both. What happens if an entire class is quarantined? And this is largely true kindergarten through 8th grade level, probably most in elementary. If an entire classroom is quarantined and the teacher is able to provide instruction, we'll have that opportunity for that teacher to be able to provide live synchronous lessons. Now, this is not going to be 6.5 hours of live lessons. One thing we learned last year was that our students don't necessarily do a fabulous job, and it's not successful for our kids to sit in front of a computer screen watching a teacher for 6.5 hours. However, if an entire class is quarantined and the teacher is able to provide instruction, we will have those availabilities to where our teachers and students will be able to participate daily in Zoom if the entire class is quarantined. If an entire class is quarantined, the teacher is not available for some reason, then we would have to move back to that asynchronous manner we discussed earlier. As Mr. Spurlock talked about with inclement weather, if a school were to close and we used inclement weather day, we would not have instruction that day. If at some point the continuous learning plan is put back in place for the state of Tennessee and we were able to close a school and count it as a remote instruction day, then we would move back to doing synchronous and asynchronous activities, both following a similar schedule across the school. The same thing would take place if a district closure. If our district were ever closed for some reason and it was an inclement weather day, just like with snow or with any other flood or any type of natural event, if it was an inclement weather day, we would not have instruction. However, if that CLP were to come back in place, we again would be able to do something with remote instruction, providing a mixture of synchronous and asynchronous activities. We'll be creating a flow chart for you as well, just to show you these different options. Tried to take just a couple minutes to be as brief but also as thorough as possible to explain some of the things we are doing as a district. I know the big thing that everyone wants to know about right now, what happens when my student is, again, to clarify, he or she is quarantined or isolated. Beginning on Monday, we will have that to where teachers will have that posted, the content they are covering. They will have a mixture of synchronous, potentially some recorded lessons, maybe from a teacher, maybe not from a teacher. Very well could be for some of our curricular resources in our textbooks as well. But we'll be increasing those options as we continue to see this school year unfold. Lastly, I just want to conclude by thanking you. Personally and professionally, every part of Rutherford County is what we do. I have students in the school system. I'm a product of the school system. My own children have been isolated and quarantined already this school year. So I understand it from a professional and in a personal standpoint. However, I assure you that we will do much better the more that we continue to work together. So as we continue to move forward with this, I ask that you continue to support our students, but also continue to support our staff, and we'll do the best that we possibly can to ensure that our two tasks that we are doing, making sure that your students have the best education possible, and also making sure that our staff is supported to provide that, I feel like we'll be very successful. I look forward to the day in a couple of weeks we're able to celebrate some of the accomplishments we made over last year. And again, thank you for all that you do for Rutherford County Schools.